Hello and welcome. Today we are going to be discussing play to earn and Aurum drops in dungeons and what that could potentially look like. We're going to try to dig into the math behind how much could potentially be dropped in dungeons, since that is supposedly coming out fairly soon. We're going to try and figure out how much we could potentially expect, and we're going to be pretty conservative. We're going to be, we're going to be really conservative and assume on the low side. We're going to take the low side estimates on everything. And if it ends up being more than that, great. But we're going to try and be pretty conservative, give the devs plenty of room in case something else comes up or they have other uses for the Aurum that they could potentially be putting out. Mobs, for example, are going to need some of the Aurum. So on the amount that can be earned in dungeons, we're going to try and take low side estimates. So there's this lovely Dune Analytics dashboard put together by Peter the Rock. You can see right up here. This is great analytics site. It's great to use if you're trying to figure out any of these statistics within the game. It's pretty much a go-to for anybody that's trying to get any information. Pretty much everything you could possibly want is here. Make sure you give him a follow on Twitter and say thanks on Discord sometime if you see him around, because this is great, and this is what we will be using to figure out how much Aurum could potentially be dropped in dungeons. So the numbers we are really interested in is this number right here. This is the amount of Aurum that was spent on Gen 5 Raiders. Now, with recruitment always open, in theory, as each generation progresses and the cost goes lower, to recruit, the number being recruited should slightly increase. Obviously, we don't have a crazy amount of demand right now, so the number is a little bit lower. But in theory, we should see this go up as more people find the project. And just because they haven't recruited yet, there's still a lot of characters that can recruit, and if the floor starts to go up, people will recruit. And of course, the retention rate is super, super high at 85% compared to 66% last time. So people are holding on to their characters. Basically, the people who recruited mostly are people who didn't intend to sell. And people who intend to sell haven't recruited yet because they wouldn't make very much profit off of recruiting. That's the kind of the way I read this. You can see there's about 300 wallets that recruited this time around, and I would guess that's probably about right for the number of people that intend to instantly dump onto the market any characters they recruit. So they're just waiting for the floor price to rise up, and then they'll recruit and sell, and we'll get a higher number here and a higher number here, and it should surpass eventually. Obviously, this has had, over 30 days to accumulate, whereas this has only had a week. So it should go up, other than Gen 2 was a bit of an anomaly because the price was so much higher. But you can see Gen 3 was 25 million. We went up to 37. Now we're at 32, but I expect this to go to 42, 43, 44, somewhere in that area by the time it's done. So what that means is it should stay somewhat stable in terms of the amount being spent into the game when you're comparing it to the number of characters. So we can use this number, because what you think about when this money gets spent is, where does it go? Half of it goes to Raider stakers in solo stake, and half of it goes back to the treasury. So that half that goes back to the treasury is essentially the amount that could potentially be dropped in dungeons. So we'll take a rough estimate. This is obviously going to go up pretty quickly, and I don't know when this was updated last. I don't know if this is up to the minute or if it gets updated every couple of days or what. I have no idea. But we'll call it for right now 32 million flat. We'll cut off a little bit, like I said, be conservative. So we've got 32 million Aurum. Let's see, that's 320,000. So that should be 32 million. Yep, there we go. So that's 32 million Aurum being spent over the course of 1 month, because there's a recruitment event every 28 days. We'll be on to the next one and get another big influx. So that means divide by 2. Because half goes to stakers and half goes back to the treasury. So that's 16 million Aurum going back to the treasury over 28 days. Because that's the cooldown on recruitment. So we're getting about 571,000 Aurum, 428 going back to the treasury per day when you average it out from recruitment alone. This does not include keys, and we're not going to consider keys because mobs need some kind of Aurum income in order to be able to drop Aurum for mobs as well. So the money that's going to mob holders has to be coming from somewhere. So we're going to assume that's coming from mobs, from key sales, and we will just be using the recruitment number to figure out how much Aurum could be dropped in dungeons. So we have 571,428 Aurum per day that can be dropped in dungeons right now using only the Aurum that is going back to the treasury. This would be a slightly deflationary take on Aurum. Basically, Aurum would slightly deflate over time if this was the case. Because there'd be some extra. Obviously, not everybody's going to run dungeons. So if they were dropping exactly this amount or trying to drop exactly this amount per day, then it would go down slightly over time as not everybody runs dungeons. So to figure out how much each character could get per day or per dungeon run, we have to figure out. So this is per day, so we multiply by 7 to get the per week. And we get about 4 million Aurum per week can get dropped. We divide by 5 because each character can do 5 free runs. And paid runs wouldn't really matter. We don't care about that because paid runs are spending 25 Aurum. So as long as you're not earning more than 25 Aurum, which I assure you the math on this will not work out to more than 25 Aurum per dungeon run, you're never going to earn enough to pay back for those keys, so there will still be more money coming out of the ecosystem as a result of you spending on keys, so we're only worried about the free runs. So that comes to 800,000 Aurum per dungeon run. And then we need to find, we can go to OpenSea and go over to my profile. Oh, I'm on the wrong account for this. Let me switch over. There we go. Go to the characters, and we can take the number of characters, 56,000 items currently in the game, and we divide by 56,000 characters, and we get an average drop of Aurum of about 14. Now that's average. Lower dungeons would be dropping less, so we can put this in as the minimum amount I would expect right now, given the current number of characters and the current amount of Aurum being spent. I would expect about 14. Now, this could be changed drastically by the amount of characters in-game changing over time, which is going to happen as more characters get recruited, and it changes by the amount being spent. We shouldn't really expect the amount being spent to stay up permanently at this level. If demand fades in the future and we get down to Gen 10 and nobody's really recruiting, then the amount being spent decreases and the amount they can afford to have out on dungeons decreases. But for a trial run for this first little bit, around 14, and you can take that 14 Aurum, we'll just level it out, times 5 runs, times 4 for 4 weeks in a month, times 0.04 for the rough price of Aurum, and you get about $11.20. And we'll go ahead and put that in parenthesis, monthly character earning. Oops, I forgot an H. So, this would be the minimum I would expect for a top-end character. 14. So expected, we could maybe go to, let's call it 20 Aurum. Because obviously we got this number from the average, so 14 at the top end would be the low end of what I would expect. If you're only getting 14 from the most difficult dungeon with a top end character, then you're obviously getting maybe 4 from lower end dungeons, or 5 Aurum from lower end dungeons, and that would be quite a bit less than the amount of Aurum going back to the treasury, so it'd be significantly deflationary. 20 would probably be more reasonable. And if you get to 20 Aurum times 5 times 4 times the price of Aurum, You get about $16, and we can go ahead and put that in. $16 monthly. Oops, I keep forgetting that H. Character earnings. Now we can compare these, and I'll just go ahead and space out a little bit here. We can compare these to the current, what you would earn for a character right now. Let's see. Actually, I'll just make a whole nother section here. Character questing earnings. Right now, the price of a Grimweed is about 5.3 Aurum per, and once you account for return time, it's about 2 of those per day, times 7 days a week is about 74.2 Aurum per week, times 4 weeks is about 296 Aurum per month, or times 0.04 is about $12, $11.80. We'll just call it $12 monthly earnings from questing. So you'd be earning about $12 from questing, and if we go to the expected for a top-end character, this would be pretty competitive, and it would cause people to want to switch back and forth between them, and it becomes really, really competitive, actually. Now, obviously, a lot of characters are questing. A lot of characters are not going to be running dungeons. Even when there are dungeons that earn, there are going to be a lot of people that just opt out of it or don't play or aren't interested or whatever the case may be. You're going to get some number of characters that just don't participate. And, I mean, there's still characters... There's still like a handful of wallets that have Gen 1 characters from back when they were initially minted that never got ported over and that never got used and just basically might as well not exist anymore. There's still some of those. So you're going to get some people that just don't participate. So it won't be the full 56,000 that are actually earning. So you can actually probably afford to drop more. I have no idea what the devs... I'd assume they're going to do pretty conservative. But you could reasonably do more, maybe let's call it 30 Aurum for a maxed out character, and then they would go down to maybe 10 or even 5 for really low end raids, doing like Hogger and Heroic Hogger, you know, and ramp up to 30 for a top end. But let's assume 30 Aurum per dungeon run, times 5 per week, times 4 weeks, times 0.04. Would get you about $24 a month. Character earnings. So this is kind of the range that I'm thinking, personally, on what I would expect. Now, these are somewhat conservative, and it also is based off of only the current characters and current spend going on in the game. As more characters keep entering... they've talked about a goal of trying to get to like 500,000, 600,000 characters to allow for enough people, or even, you know, some people talk about 1 million characters being in game. Obviously, that changes the math substantially. If there's, instead of 56,000, there's 1 million characters. If we were still at the same amount, so that's, 32 million. Yeah, 32 million divided by 2 for the amount there is 1.6 million. Divided by the number of dungeon runs, which was 5, would be, what, 3.2. What am I doing wrong here? It was 16 million Aurum per day, or per month. Okay, yeah, that's what it was. All right, so yeah, 16 million per month per 28 days divided by 28. I'm just going to refresh this so that it reloads. So 16 million. Gosh dang it. I keep misclicking now. 16 million. 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3. So yeah, that's 16 million. Divided by 28 days is the per day amount that could go out. Times 7 days in a week. Divided by the 5 dungeon runs to get your individual dungeons. divided by the number of characters. So if there were 1,000,000 characters, then you could only afford about 0.8 Aurum if there were 1,000,000 active characters running at the current Aurum amount being spent. You could only afford a little less than 1 Aurum per character in order for it to be sustainable with the amount of Aurum coming out of circulation as a result of recruitment. So the 1,000,000 character, 1,000,000 characters, same spend. Numbers would look, and obviously this is completely meaningless because we're not going to have the same amount being spent. In order to recruit 1,000,000 characters, and the 56,000 is basically completely meaningless if we're talking about 1,000,000 characters. That's 3. So in order to get 1,000,000 characters, we'd have to spend at least the 1,000 Aurum that it takes to recruit a Gen 10. This would be bare minimum, divided by the 28 days. Would be 35.7 million Aurum per day, divided by the 1,000,000 characters. So you could get about, 35 Aurum per day-ish from a character at that point, safely, for that first month. So the numbers would be completely different. But for the sake of argument, if it was the same exact spend, and obviously that number here also doesn't make a whole lot of sense because that also assumes that you're going to keep up spending that much Aurum from recruitment, which wouldn't happen at that point. If we're at 1,000,000 characters all recruiting in the same month, it's not going to keep up at that. We're going to hit a supply point where it doesn't make sense to recruit, and spending will drop off substantially. So I'm not sure if they will do it as a static amount and just be super conservative with their static amount, maybe closer to this 14 Aurum drops, or if they will have dungeons automatically change how much Aurum they're dropping based off of the amount being spent. That would be a completely reasonable option. I don't really know where they're at on this, but I figured I'd give everybody kind of an idea of what I was thinking on where Aurum drops might end up. Put a little bit of math behind it so you can get an idea. But I'd expect somewhere between these two right here. Somewhere between 14 to 20 for a top-of-the-line maxed-out character, not accounting for the Aurum bonus. So 30% bonus on Gen 1s on 20 Aurum would be an extra 6. So you'd be looking at like 26 Aurum. 26-ish Aurum per dungeon times 5 per week times 4 weeks would be like $20.80-ish per month, give or take a little bit on a Gen 1. So you'd be looking at, what would that be, times 12 months? You'd be looking at about $250 a year in income from running dungeons, just from the Aurum drops, which I think is completely reasonable. Most of the earnings are going to come from gear, and that's kind of been the idea from the start that the devs have had and wanted to push. So I think that this is a pretty reasonable amount. And if you take this 14, and if you assume that you're splitting, like if you're running a guild and you assume you're splitting half of the Aurum with whoever's actually running the characters, then you're talking about your guild member getting 7 and you getting 7. And that's kind of the price that's been thrown around, and at least from the couple of people that have DM'd me looking to run my characters for me, basically, and I've just had them questing instead. Right now, they've been talking about charging me around 6 to 8 Aurum, and I've been looking, for the little bit of time that I paid people to run my characters, I was paying 10 Aurum per run, so 7 seems somewhat reasonable. You can run quite a few characters through dungeons in their current state. So if you're earning 7 at the top end, that'd be pretty reasonable, I would think. And then you could do some kind of deal with your guild members on the loot side as well. So this is kind of what I'm thinking the drops might look like when they get implemented. And they're talking about in the announcement possibly a week from now, basically, a little over a week from now, they might start experimenting with Aurum drops. So at 14, even if you assume at 14, if you assumed that all 56,000 characters, which isn't the case, are all max level, all running the hardest dungeon, all earning this 14 Aurum, let's even add the 30% and assume they were all Gen 1s, which also isn't the case, and they were earning 18.2 to completely max out. Per dungeon run per week times 5 dungeon runs every week is 91 Aurum a week. Times 4 would be 364 per month. Times 56,000 characters. You'd be earning about 20 million or so Aurum, and like we said, there's about 16 million Aurum getting sent to the treasury every month right now from recruiting. So you'd be left with a surplus of about 4.3 million in Aurum inflation per month at that low end estimate, which is minuscule. The treasury in the past has spent 2 or 3 weeks at a time selling 1 million Aurum a day, and it had no effect on Aurum's price. I think this would... there has to be a little bit just to account for player growth and the amount that needs to be in the ecosystem for spending on keys and all the other stuff. There needs to be a little bit of Aurum inflation to account for the increased number of users so that the price of Aurum doesn't get out of control and shoot up to like $1 or something when you see a sudden spike in players. I think this is a completely reasonable amount of monthly inflation. If anything, it should be a little bit higher than that, so I'd probably lean more towards this number instead of the 14. And that is assuming every character is running dungeons, which is absolutely not the case. Not every character is. So I think this is a pretty reasonable spot to start at. We'll see if I'm right or wrong. We'll see what the devs decide to go with. Maybe I'm wildly off and this video will age horribly and they'll be dropping 4 Aurum per dungeon. Or maybe I'll be wildly off in the other direction and the devs think this is way too conservative and they'll be dropping 50 Aurum per dungeon. We have no idea. This is just where I'm at, and I thought I would put a video out kind of in depth on what I'm thinking. This is completely irrelevant, as we talked about. But yeah, this would be pretty competitive. You'd be earning like $16 to $20 a month with a maxed out character compared to about 12 to maybe a little bit more if you're running Newts and the price of Newts stays up. I use the price of Grimweed here, but I'm using that price because I expect the price of Newts to come down. Obviously, you earn a bit more on Newts, and even more if you have a mount, but I'm not including that because I kind of expect the price to continue to come down on the price of ingredients. I don't think they're really at a sustainable price just yet, so that's why I'm being a bit conservative here. But I think this is pretty competitive, and it would create a really good balance for the ecosystem if you could earn about the same amount, a little bit more from actively playing, obviously. And a lot of people would go to actively playing, and that would cause the price of the resources to kind of stabilize that you get from questing as people running characters spend minor health potions to survive a dungeon and earn that Aurum. Sometimes it'll make sense to do that. And you'll kind of reach an equilibrium eventually between the two. Anyway, thanks for watching. If you found this at all helpful, make sure to like, comment, subscribe. And again, the dashboard doing analytics is amazing. Give a shout out to Peter the Rock and follow him on Twitter. He puts out a lot of great content, and this dashboard has all of the information you could possibly want. Since I'm using it in the video to find my information, I figured probably should give him a shout out here because it really is a fantastic resource for finding information. You can find out how many raiders are questing each resource, how much of each resource is being brought in, and this is why these numbers here are why I do not think the price is going to stay stable. That is a lot of resources coming in. That is a lot of minor health potions being crafted and no use for them yet in game, though I expect that in the next couple of weeks. But thanks for watching, and I will see you next time.